This is Fletcher by Tracy Guzeman. At age 72, Myrna realized every person she met reminded her of someone she already knew or had known. Evidently, God had run out of possible permutations. She'd been around long enough to see everything he had to offer. The postman, despite exemplary posture and a decisive stride, wore the pained expression of her college history professor, a man perpetually wounded by his certainty that an entire generation would fail to divine the importance of decaying monarchies and shifting borders. The organized redhead leading the book group was the reincarnation of her son's kindergarten teacher, friendly enough until challenged, sporting a bob so perfectly kept that Myrna couldn't bring herself to reprimand her oldest son when he reached out and grabbed a handful of the woman's hair. The elfin girl taking her coffee order was one of the bridesmaids 47 years ago. The one with a sly half-smile that made Myrna feel as though someone else had divined all life's secrets first and taken the better share of everything. And most unsettling of all, both the bag boy at the grocery store and the new minister were her high school boyfriend. Down to the flushed ears, unfortunate plaid shirts, and ill-conceived sideburns. Her desire to be struck by wonder when seeing something for the first time turned time into a physical ache she couldn't ignore. How heady they had been, those adolescent discoveries, freckles in the pattern of Cassiopeia, the reverberating boom of fireworks in her chest, newborns with fine traceries of blood pulsing just below their milky skin, the dizzying acceleration of pulse after the vague impression of another's lips upon her own. But those joys had long been left behind, and in their stead came a sense of familiarity and routine that now seemed suffocating. Even the ahas uttered by her sons during their weekly calls from opposite coasts were predictable. She could put a finger on the exact moment they stopped listening to her and turned their attention to some other grueling task, checking their stocks, buttering their toast, waving a child off into another room, leaving her tethered safely in the middle of the country between them. So there it was. Everything had been noticed. Everyone had been seen. She was full of knowing as she was going to get. Until Fletcher. In spite of his name, Fletcher was a youngish sort of person. Not that she'd ever asked him specifically, and now it would have been awkward. But he seemed to hover somewhere in his mid-30s, younger than her sons, but older than the shirtless bronze college student who mowed her lawn when he needed beer money. Fletcher was constantly pale and slender, his hair a tangled mass of salt and pepper curls. His body boasted a pointed topography of jutting shoulder blades, sharp knees, and knuckles that threatened to erupt through the skin at his finger joints. His eyes were large and usually tearing. Allergies, he had explained to her that first afternoon, dabbing at his sparse lashes with a handkerchief that had the initials FND embroidered in one corner. The N being for Nelson, he told her. After my father, he said, and then paused before adding, your husband. That's not possible, she'd said, promptly shutting the door in his face. He rang the bell again, and when she didn't open the door, he installed himself on the stoop, equidistant between the cone-shaped topiaries flanking the entry. She watched through the living room shears while he proceeded to pull out small branches and pick off tiny leaves in what she deemed a thoughtful manner. After a good 20 minutes of pacing and peeking, Myrna hid her purse in a dusty bowling bag in the hall closet and then opened the door and invited him into the kitchen. He moved in spurts and stops, teetering slightly like someone unused to the constraints of sinew and bone. While the direction of his head indicated his intention to go one way, his feet headed in another, resulting in several near misses where he and Myrna narrowly avoided colliding, two planets thrown out of their respective orbits. Nothing like her husband, who had never walked so much as glided from one part of a room to another. A quiet, liquid sort of man who simply skimmed over any unpleasantness in life. "Do you drink coffee?" she asked. "Not really," he answered, looking just beyond her shoulder. "What does that mean, yes or no?" "What I would really like is a whiskey." "It's 10 o'clock in the morning," she said. "The sun is over the yardarm somewhere." Fletcher yawned and stretched his arms above his head, exposing a strip of stomach flesh that was taut and ivory. Myrna poured coffee, black, into a mug with a chip on the rim opposite the handle. She set it on the table in front of him. "Nelson never said things like that." "I don't understand, Mother. What in the world would possess you to let him come into the house?" Even though through the static of his cell phone, the clipped first syllables and the dead air while their words were transmitted, she could hear the astonishment in her son's voice. "Well, he was just sitting on the stoop. I couldn't let him stay out there all day. What would the neighbors think? And I suppose I was curious, to tell you the truth. I wanted to hear what he had to say." "People like him prey on the elderly. It's a scam. You know that, don't you? What if he had a weapon?" "The elderly." Had he really said that? Launched her into the middle of that crowded, disintegrating flock with one decisive stroke? Oh, fortunately for both of us, Alan, he did not have a weapon, unless it was artfully concealed, and I wasn't going to frisk him at the door. Nevertheless, it doesn't matter. He doesn't look anything like your father. "Of course he doesn't, Mother. Why would he?" She could hear the unevenness of his breathing, and the realization that this encounter had thrown a wrench into his machinery cheered her slightly. "You don't need to worry. I doubt he'll be back. I'm going to check with Paul, see if he can move his schedule around. Someone should be there with you." "Don't be silly. I'm perfectly fine. And your brother is just as busy as you are." "Well, he wanted money, didn't he?" "He didn't want money. He didn't know your father had died, actually. I think he was surprised." "Well, they always want money, Mother. They always want something." "Are these your sons?" Fletcher was standing in the hall between the living and dining rooms, looking at the collection of photos on the wall. The blue robes of graduation, the stiff tuxedos from proms and weddings, one picture of the boys in cutoffs, their faces dusted with summer freckles, balancing precariously on the lip of a rowboat that had been pulled on shore. "Yes," Myrna said, scanning first the photos, then Fletcher's face for any resemblance. "I was an only child," Fletcher said, examining his fingernails. "I'm sorry to hear that. My sons have always been very close to each other." She wondered, as she said it, whether it was actually true. She could only recall the ceaseless childhood battles, her oft-issued marching orders sending them to their respective corners. "I always thought I might have liked to have brothers." Fletcher looked out the living room window at the pool, the cool blue of it flanked by pots of fern and kaffir lily. Myrna watched his face tighten as his eyes scanned the landscape. "Do you swim?" she asked. "Quite well. There was a community pool close to our house. I spent most of my summer days there." The strain of casual conversation pulled on her. Were the summers warm then where you grew up?" Fletcher smiled. "Well, as warm as they are here, I suppose. This is where I grew up. Although not in this neighborhood, of course. Myrna suddenly needed to sit down. 30 years ago, 35 years ago, did it matter? There had never been any real difficulty in her marriage that she could pinpoint. No loud fights, slammed doors, dramatic exits. When Nelson died 6 months ago, he had merely crumpled where he stood, in front of the kitchen sink. Nothing crashed to the floor. There was no gasp of regret, no outstretched hand, no fevered confession. 47 years ago, they had stood in front of people who loved them and promised to build a life together. And that was what they had done. Her hands tightened around the glass she held. My husband was afraid of the water, she said. I called a friend from high school. He's on the police force now. He said he'll make a few inquiries and get back to me. Her oldest son's voice was calm and decisive, and Myrna could hear the shadow of her late husband's echoing across it. Problem identified. Appropriate response determined. Situation resolved. Is this someone I would know, Paul? Why can't he make these inquiries and just call and talk to me about it? I think it's better if you let us handle this. But Alan was probably right. My friend said these guys check the paper every day. They read the obituaries. They look for people they think will be vulnerable, create a history where none exists, and try to inveigle their way into their lives so that they can gain control of their assets. Inveigle. Such a funny word. How strange it sounded coming out of her son's mouth, as if he were defending some invisible territory that stretched between them. I don't have anything anyone would want. Well, the house, the cars, the cabin at the lake, my God, that's convertible. It's a classic. Mother, are you listening to me? The important thing is to shut him down. Don't answer the door. If he bothers you again, or you see him in the neighborhood, call the police. If he's read Dad's obituary, he should know that you have sons. Once he realizes you're not in charge of distributing the assets of the estate, he'll move on. She heard the edge of a whispered conversation. Oh, there's one other thing. Alan and I have been talking. We think it might be good to have someone come and stay with you at the house. You could interview them, of course. We'd just handle the initial screening. Myrna found herself staring back across a wide chasm. All the years of nurturing and encouragement and hope, the nights spent watching the second hand of her bedside clock pulse past dimly lit numbers, the meals made and the beds made and the sacrifices made. And now her sons were going to grant her permission to interview the stranger they would choose to live in her house? She could already see plump ankles in sturdy white orthopedic shoes resting on her glass-topped coffee table. The sudden appearance of alien foods in her refrigerator, strong-smelling vegetable dishes and expired yogurt. Vanity would require her to pencil in eyebrows every damn morning. No! She decided the best course of action for the time being was to ignore her son, ignore them both for that matter. She started to hang up the phone, but hesitated. She could not stop herself from asking, Paul, you haven't even considered that it might be a possibility? She waited for a telltale pause, but her son replied quickly and smoothly, his voice glossy as with your reassurance. Well, of course it's not a possibility. Don't be ridiculous. Fletcher brought a woman with him when he came the third time. Christine offered her hand to Myrna when Fletcher introduced her, and even though it was a hot July afternoon and the sun baked the grass into a crisp fringe, she would not come into the house, saying that she preferred an occasional breeze to air conditioning. The woman was as pale as Fletcher, with curly hair the yellow of lemon taffy. She parked herself on the front porch steps. Myrna watched her thin sundress ride up past her knees, sticking to her thighs in spots where her sweat had soaked through. She ran her fingers around the edge of a floppy hat that hid the upper half of her face. Myrna brought her a large tumbler of water with ice and watched from the doorway as Christine picked the cubes from the glass and ran them down her neck, across her chest and between her shoulders. Then she and Fletcher walked into the dining room and sat down on opposite sides of the table. "Christine is your girlfriend?" Fletcher pressed his palms together, carefully lining up the tips of his fingers. "For a while now. I want to marry her, but I think she harbors illusions." "Illusions of what marriage is like?" "Illusions that she could find a better catch." Myrna felt a surge of happiness cartwheel across her chest. He had a sense of humor. She thought she might be able to like him on his own, not as someone attached to someone else. "Where did you park? You could pull into the driveway, you know." "Oh, we walked. I don't drive." Fletcher fumbled in his shirt pocket and pulled out a little wrapped box. His fingers were long and spindly. Myrna knew he was conscious of this by the way he folded them under into loose fists, his thumbs tucked neatly inside. "You don't drive?" I never learned." "But everyone learns to drive." "Not everyone." He pushed the box across the table toward her. "It's not my birthday." "Pretend it is if you want. I don't mean to make you feel uncomfortable. It's just you've been strangely, I'm not sure what word I want. Open-minded?" "I can't take it, Fletcher. I'm not open-minded." She steeled herself and looked into his eyes. "This is hard to say. I don't want to hurt your feelings, but I'm sorry for you because I'm convinced there's absolutely no possibility." He looked away from her. "Well, maybe I still want you to take it." Myrna unwrapped the box and then opened it. A small enameled pen lay nestled between folds of cotton batting, a yellow sun with rays in alternating shades of orange and rose. Or was it a dahlia? Well, it wasn't her style. She'd never worn much in the way of jewelry, though her husband and sons gifted her with these same sorts of boxes whenever there was an occasion requiring some sort of fuss. Nonetheless, she affixed the pen to the front of her blouse and looked at Fletcher for approval. "Do you like it?" he asked. "Oh, it's lovely. Exactly the sort of thing I might have chosen for myself." "How very thoughtful of you." It was the first time she could remember anyone actually asking her if she liked the gift. She had never had the need to invent these lies for her own children. She rested her hand on the table, palm up, and unfolded her fingers, waiting. After a moment, Fletcher put his hand in hers. Myrna held perfectly still, resisting dueling urges, one to squeeze his hand in hers to give him some measure of comfort, and the other, in homage to her sons, to bend his fingers back until he cried in alarm. "Fletcher, why are you coming here?" He looked to the side and then appeared to study a space somewhere over the top of her head before finally fixing his eyes on her. "I keep thinking that I'll get some feeling of him, of who he was, what sort of a person, and then, yes? Well, I hadn't expected to like you, but I guess I do." She practiced saying the words, her pacing, a tone that would indicate whatever had or hadn't happened was already a distant memory of little importance. When her sons asked, she told them they'd been right, and that the man, whoever he was, whatever unscrupulous motives he might have had simply stopped coming around. Decided she hadn't been worth it, not worth the trouble, no doubt. So there's no need to do anything more. Evidently the problem has resolved itself. Isn't that fortunate for all of us? She changed the subject and waited for their conversations to settle once again into the familiar latitudes of duty and indifference. Fletcher had a weakness for gin and tonics. When Christine accompanied him, she preferred sweet tea, which Myrna attempted with limited degrees of success. They drank by the pool. She made lunch for them on occasion, clipping the crusts from their sandwiches as if they were children. Christine brought along a guitar with bits of shellac peeling off and played folk songs, playing them off-key, inventing lyrics when she forgot them. Who would have suspected that John Denver had written, "All my bags are packed, it's going to snow"? All the while, Fletcher smiled indulgently over Christine's bent head with a look of such affection it left Myrna buoyant. Every so often he would ask her about Nelson, but usually in vague terms and less frequently than he had in the beginning. Had he enjoyed his work? Did he have any particular calling? Was he a religious man? Did he chew oysters or let them slide down the back of his throat in a single gulp, savoring only the brine? A good question, she had told him, but neither. Her husband had an unadventurous appetite, strongly rooted in Midwest staples. At times she wished she could have given him what he wanted, a connection, some piece of flotsam he could cling to in a shared gene pool. But there was nothing more meaningful than what you might find in any group of people gathered together and polled about the details of their lives, random similarities as often as disparate traits. Then one afternoon, when she was coming in from the garden and passing the side door to the garage, she saw the two of them in the front seat of Nelson's convertible. Christine's golden head was resting against Fletcher's neck. His left hand firmly grasped the steering wheel while his right arm circled her shoulders. They were oblivious to her presence, both staring straight ahead at the garage wall as though they were at a drive-in movie. And welling up through the depths of her irrefutable, unassailable memory came one last proof that everything truly had been seen before. It was an image struggling to breathe, a picture she had tamped down some 30-odd years before until she had turned it two-dimensional, nothing more than a line in time she had chosen to step over and ignore. A memory that now swelled and expanded until it became again what it had always been on that night when she was driving home in a car with friends, two people sitting in exactly this position, in exactly this car, on the far side of town, on a hot summer night with the air so heavy she found herself quite suddenly unable to breathe.